So last time we started talking about Sarah. We spoke about Sarah, and we basically we're looking sort of at like the Kabbalistic origin and then like the practical outcome of that Kabbalistic origin and then how that applies to us. And that's sort of, I think, the pattern we'll follow for the rest of the Imais as well. We'll look at the Kabbalistic origin, how that practically applies, and the message for us. So when we were discussing Sarah, we were talking about her power of Gevura, of judgment, as opposed to Avram's chesed, as like a counter to Avram's chesed. And we were discussing how, despite maybe where our minds would naturally go, that in the role of like motherhood and nurturing, you would think, oh, that's chesed. That's just, boundless giving. But we were discussing the necessity for gevura, which is an element of judgment, but it's, about making like a calculated, sharing the nurture as it is particular to the person that you're nurturing. That's not chesed, that's gevura. That requires making an element of judgment. That's like sort of tailoring the nurture to the specific person. Also, in the role of nurturing, it's necessary to exclude those outside of the person that you're nurturing, right? It's not an inclusive role. It's not a role where you can take care of everyone. If you take care of everyone, you're neglecting everyone, right? So in the role of nurturing, we need to sort of focus and be exclusive to the people who we are nurturing, as opposed to the whole world. And then we see with Sarah that like she's sort of like cutting out all the other things around her son and saying, no, this is our focus, and this is who we need to focus on. We were going through a number of different elements throughout her life to portray this point of the necessity within the role of nurture, of the boundaries, of the gevura, of the limitations and exclusions, which is, again, not like, it's maybe a little counterintuitive to where we like naturally go, but how important those are. So today we're going to move on. We'll see. I have ambitions to get through all the Imais today because we're sort of like in these parshias right now. So we'll see if we get through them all. We're going to look at Rifka, and then we're going to look at Raul and Leia together as like countering each other. Okay, or supporting each other, completing each other. So starting with Rifka. So that was in like last week's parsha is really the story of Rifka, but we're gonna Rifka. So it's an interesting thing. If you remember last time we were saying Avram wasn't able to recognize the negative, or maybe even if he recognized it, he wasn't able to like act on the fact that Yishmael was negative. He wanted, include everyone, right? And obviously it was his son. So there is that element as well, but he's only able to see the positive in the fact that he's chesed. Chesed is a very positive lens. And it takes Sarah to be like, no, we can't have this guy around, right? He's a negative influence. The interesting thing is, and we said the reason she's able to do that is because she's gevura. We move into this week's parsha, and not this week's parsha, last week's parsha, Parshas Toldos, and we have Yitzchak and Rifka. And we have a similar setup where we have the two sons. One is more positive, is the good boy, and one is the rebel. And we see a similar sort of situation where Yitzchak is favoring Esav, right? And it takes Rivka's foresight and vision to say, no, the blessings and the chain is going to continue through Yaakov, not through Esav, right? So why is it that Yitzchak favored Yishmael? Oh gosh. Yeah. No, Yitzchak favored Esav. There we go. So why is it that Yitzchak favored Esav? The reason Yitzchak favored Esav, and Chassidus and Kabbalah go into this in depth, is because Esav represents this crazy potential energy. Esav represents the power of Taihu, which is this like massive force of energy. And we see that Esav became his offsprings became a huge nation. You could say Edom, which is Greece going into Rome, which becomes basically the Western world, right? So Esav is a formidable person. He obviously contains this like massive potential energy. And Chassidus explains that this energy is called the energy of Taihu. It's just like extreme force. The problem is that Taihu needs to be contained in vessels. We know, you can give example of someone who a lot of the successful people in the world, right, are people who, let's say, were not so good in school, right? Why is it that they were not so good in school? Because if you have, like we said before, this potential energy, and you're in like a very constricted environment, right? So what happens? The energy plus the constricted environment results in explosion, because the environment is not able to contain the energy. And bam, it all just collapses, right? And then what happens as someone matures and they get older, often these people with great energy are able to find the right vessels and environments that are fitting for their energy, right? That's really the trick. And so, someone who is able to, start a business that works with their energies, find a space that works with their energy, and then their energy is in a fitting vessel and it doesn't explode. Instead, it's channeled and it creates something awesome, right? So Asa represents this massive energy, but the energy is so great that it's almost in that time where Asa was currently living and in his space where he was at, there really were no vessels that could contain it, right? There was no way to channel it positively. He was just out to destroy, in a sense, because of all that energy. And you see, the same way there are people who are successful, there are some people who are successful, and then there are some people who are never able to find that success in a conventional definition because they're not able to find those vessels that fit them. And so they end up, in crime or whatever, and they end up in a negative situation, or they can never get their life together, right? So Yitzchak, even though he's judgment, right? We said last time, Avram wasn't able to recognize the bad in Yishmael because he's pure chesed, and he doesn't judge, right? He's not able to make that judgment. Yitzchak, he's Gvura. Shouldn't he be able to see, oh, this guy's the wrong choice if he's making judgments, right? But Yitzchak is Gevura as it still remains up like in heaven, right? So as it's a spiritual thing, you can make a spiritual assessment from a very like removed point of view. And you could be like, wow, look at this guy. Look at all his energy. He has all this awesome energy. I'm going to give it to him, right? Who recognizes that this is actually not going to work out and that there really aren't vessels. There's no way to channel his energy right now. And when Mashiach comes, it says we are going to be able to channel Esav's energy. It's going to be transformed. Adam is going to be transformed, right? But in the world as it currently is, it was just like too much of a force, too powerful. Who sees that? Only Rifka, right? Because when you're judging and when you're taking things into consideration, we can take things into consideration only we can't judge. And this goes back to like, what is the role of like a nurturer? So we said we need to make judgments and we need to be able to see like, oh, what's the potential in this person? But we also need to be able to fit that in to what is the real world, right? Not into just the idealistic picture of it, but into the real world view of what's going on. You can give an example within ourselves. So we all need to make sort of periodic assessments of ourselves. That's the only way to grow and change, right? Is to make a periodic assessment of yourself. Where am I holding? If not, we'll just like continue along the status quo, right? So where am I holding? And I make an assessment. And I recognize I can make a list of, all my capabilities and my strengths and my resources, right? And then once I recognize my resources, I need to make a choice of what am I going to do with these resources, right? Which ones am I going to work with, right? When we're making these calculations, it's sometimes you get sucked, and this is where we make the wrong choices and we pick things that are sort of too big, and then we just don't get anything done, right? Because I'm making the assessment on the ideal level. So I can be like, okay, so technically I'm a person who, if I wanted to, I don't know, let's choose like a silly goal. Not silly. Or okay, I'm gonna go to I'm gonna start learning every day for a half an hour because I have the time. Technically, I waste at least a half an hour a day. So I could technically, start learning for a half an hour a day. I'm gonna choose a book that is, appeals to me, and I'm gonna make this commitment to learn for a half an hour a day because that's like within my capabilities. But then at the end of the day, if I'm not living in a world of idealism and I'm going to ground that decision-making process into realism, right, into the real world, I know that that's just too much for me, right? That's not going to practically happen. I don't have the kalim accessible to me right now to make that act, to follow through all the way, right? So when we're judging, we can't just judge that power. We need to judge the kalim as well. We need to judge my implementation tools, right? So do I actually have the capability to implement 30 minutes of learning a day? Or will it be more successful for me to make the choice to learn for 30 minutes twice a week, or to go to one share, or to, something like that? And so if we want to actually achieve something in the real world, we need to be making the judgments on a grounded level as well, because we tend to just go to to judge the energy and not the vessels, not the tools that we have to get it done, right? And that's really the power of Rifka. And what this is that Rifka, Rifka contains within her, if you scramble up the letters of her name, Rifka is connected to the word bakar, cattle. So at first, when you're reading that, you're like, oh, that doesn't sound so complimentary. Like, what does that mean? That like she's rooted in this animalistic element. But really, that's the power of Rifka, is the power of transformation. That's why it says she has the power to transform. We know bakar, animal, it refers to the animal within ourselves, right? Like the animal forces within ourselves, our animal side, which is just like the more me-centric side of ourselves, our natural selves. And the whole point of living is to transform that natural self into maybe to be a little more godly, right? That's our mission. And within the world as well, all the animal that is within the world, all the sort of the natural state of the world, our goal is to transform it to being just a little more godly as much as we can, right? And Rifka holds that power of transformation. That's why her name is Rifka, from bakar. And then if you like scramble it up, and then you get to Rifka, right? She contains the power to transform the world. But, and this is like the important lesson that we're learning from Rifka. What is the foresight that's necessary for transformation is being able to foresee what is the realistic expectation, not the idealistic expectation. Because in the world of idealism, we can't actually achieve the transformation. If you want to achieve the transformation, you need to move down into a world of realistic expectation. And realistically, she sees that Yaakov, maybe his energy is not as powerful and booming and intense, but he has the tools and the vessels that are necessary. He has fitting vessels to his energy. And he, both in potential and in reality, is much more likely and able to make this happen, right? So she's able to understand which task is suited to which person, and that's how we achieve this transformation, is by understanding what task do I need to take upon myself, and which even in like, we have choices in how we go about transforming the world. There are some things that we transform them by staying away from them, right? I can look at something and I can say, again, let's say, I don't know, I'm not thinking of good examples today, but okay, this is a good one. So I think like a lot of us struggle with our like technology boundaries, right? So I know personally for myself, my best way to interact with technology in a productive way is when I put it away. That's just the reality, right? I've noticed, like, let's say, right, I got a watch that beeps when I need to see something important. And it's actually enhanced my life so much because I can have my phone in a totally different room, which means that I'm away from it. And then I'm not on it, right? And I'm not using it, because sometimes you think, oh, I need to have it next to me in case someone calls me, it's important, right? But I just put it away and I don't see it, right? Because when it's next to me, I am not in a space right now where I can have it next to me and engage with it fully productively. I've tried. I try to convince myself, I try to be like, I'm beyond that, but it's not true. And it's really not built to be that way. Like, it's, the whole technological system is really built to like suck you in a way that like you're not in control, right? But so for me, with this, I have to recognize, how do I transform this particular thing? I transform it most productively by putting it away, right? That's how I transform it. And then there are other things that I can transform by going into them and working through them and utilizing them in positive ways, right? And we all have, you can apply that also to like certain traits that we have with ourselves, right? For some people, you know, every trait has a positive side and a negative side, right? They say like, oh, the thing that attracts you to the person that you marry is usually the thing that's going to end up driving you crazy, because every trait has its positive side. That means that they're very strong in this thing, right? Which means that they're going to have the positive manifestation, and it's going to have its negative manifestation, right? So similarly within ourselves, we have to look at our traits. Which traits? It's not that we're saying that you need to like suppress a part of ourselves, but which part of ourselves is it worth like really engaging in and working through that trait to utilize it most positively, right? That's really the judgment that we're doing, and that's how we transform ourselves. So Rifka, again, she has this vision, and she has this very practical element of being able to see the potential and in the state as it's going to translate into reality. And again, we're talking about all these things as like spiritual DNA sources for ourselves. So hopefully somewhere within ourselves, we can find this power of Rifka, of being able to translate the potential in a way that it's very real and realistic. Okay, so that would be Rifka. I would say questions, comments, but before we move on to Raul and Leia. So that's this week's parsha, is Raul and Leia. And for Raul and Leia specifically, I feel like you need a deeper story, because when you read it superficially, it's just like can be upsetting from our 21st century viewpoints, where we feel like people maybe deserve more than what we have. Leia is hated. Raul, meanwhile, feels hated because she doesn't have children. Like, it's just like, it doesn't seem like anyone really ends up so happy, right? Once Raul has her children, she dies. And like, it's just, and it has like almost like a tragic note to it. And this is, it should be a positive story, right? It's like the birth of the Jewish people. And you just have this like very interesting dynamic. They're sisters, which makes it worse, right? Like, he loves one, he hates one. She knows that he doesn't like her as much. It just doesn't feel right. And so we're going to look a little bit at like the Kabbalistic origin of their personalities to understand the story a little more. It might not help us with the real story to feel better, but at least we can understand like the deeper understanding of what's going on. And then maybe when Mashiach comes, we'll learn we'll understand how the real story played out. But so we have Leah and Rachel, two sisters. Yaakov is coming to look for a wife. His mother sends him to, again, back to Rifka, having like the foresight of knowing where her son needs to go to find his mate. She sends him off back home to her brother, to his family, and he has these two daughters. He has Rachel and Leah. Rachel's the younger one, and Leah's the older one. So I made a little, there's like a lot of parts to this. So I made a little, I wrote a little chart so you can follow along without it becoming too confusing. So we have Leah and Rachel. We're going to skip to the part where it says Leah and Rachel. Leah is called Hagedayla, the older sister, and Rachel is called Hakatana, the younger sister. If you if you break up the words a little bit, Hagedayla can also be read as Hey Gedayla, right? The big Hey. And Hakatana could be read as Hey Katana, the small Hey. So now that we know that Leia is the big Hey and Rachel is the small Hey, we're going to move back up to our Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? To the letters of Hashem's name. The letters of Hashem's name of Yud Kei Vav Kei is basically the energy of God. You can say that God created a personality for himself so that he could engage with the world in a way that we can relate back to him, right? So he created this personality for himself. The personality that he created is this Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's how he shares himself with us, through the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? So we're going to break down the name of Hashem. So Yud, which is the initial, it's just a little dot, right? Yud is the initial spark of inspiration of an idea. It's called Chachma, right? Chachma is intuition. Chachma is, right? So like when you just have a sense about something, right? So can you expound on it? Do you have words for it? Not really. It's just like that little, you can't even describe it. It's just that little thing somewhere in the back of your brain that you just have this like understanding of something, or even before, even if it's not intuition, we can talk about it just like that first understanding, the initial spark of creativity, right? That's Chachma. Then Chachma needs, then how do we engage with our Chachma? We need to expound it and sort of flesh it out, right? So we could then take either the idea or the intuition or the spark of creativity and we expand on that. We can, if it's an idea, you start to analyze it. You start to fit it back into all the other ideas that you know, right? You fit it into your whole schema of ideas that you have in your brain. You start to expand on it. You start to find more words for it, right? That's all the process of expansion. With creativity, similar process, right? You have the spark of the idea. Oh, how's it actually going to look? What are all of its different facets, whatever it is that you're creating? And you have that power of expansion. So we see the Hey takes the Yud, and I should have written it in, not in script, but in regular letters. If you have it written in regular letters, you see how the Hey literally takes the Yud and draws it out, right? Expands on the Yud. Then, so that's the intellectual part of God, or as we're going to discuss how it also plays out in a human being. Then when you have an idea, after you have an idea, if you really want to cement the idea and make it even stronger, you draw it down through the power of Das. Das is the power of taking the idea and making it personal, right? So you can have an idea and you understand it in an abstract way or in a way that's depersonalized, but to really understand it and have like a complete grasp of it, or if you want the idea to actually have an impact on you or really on anyone else, what you have to do, you need to make it personal, right? To understand an idea, first you have to understand it depersonalized. Otherwise, you're not actually understanding it. You're putting it automatically into your own worldview, so it's going to be skewed, right? So first you have to understand it for what it is. Then you introduce it back into your own life, into your personal sense, and into your world, right? And that's the process of the Das. And then what happens as a result of that is that then we have an emotional response to it. Once we are able to make it personal, then we will have an emotional response to the idea, right? So like if something happens to you, once it's personal, that's when you have an emotional response. And that's what the Vav represents, drawing it down from the world of intellect into the world of emotions, right? And so finally, once we have it internalized and we have an emotional response to it, then we act upon it. If you want to actually act upon something, you need to have an emotional response to it. The emotion is what drives us to action, right? So you'll see, like, often people, let's say, who are very intellectually minded or are engaged in the world of intellect, there's not, let's say, like the whole world of academia, it's not a very action-oriented world, right? It all stays in ideas, right? So you're writing papers and you're responding to the papers, et cetera, right? But if you actually want it to have an impact, if you want it to be like applied, you have to draw in the emotion, because emotion is what draws us, is what like propels us to act. As long as we're in like an academic world, we're happy to like debate ideas from today till tomorrow. But like the people who are debating don't actually necessarily make a difference, right? You have to have that emotional connection to it, and that's what drives us to action. And so Malchus, which is the last Hey, is action, and it's specifically connected to speech, because it's really through speech that things happen in this world, right? It's through speech and through sharing ideas that we actualize things, right? It's through that power. So why is speech the final Hey? It's because there are, in Hebrew at least, there are 5 root letters, like root sounds that you make with your mouth. There's like there's the air sounds, there's the like stronger sounds, the lip sounds, the tongue. I'm not sure exactly, but basically there's 5 root sounds, and so those are what create all of our speech. And our speech is what helps us share. It also says the king rules through his word, right? How is it that there's any rulership? How is there any leadership? Leadership always begins with speech, right? So speech, again, is the way that we share with other people. Okay, so that's basically the process. For anything to come about, we have the initial spark of the idea, the expansion of the idea, personalization of the idea into the world of emotion, and then it goes outward into actualization, right? This is the process God used to create the world. This is like the personality God created to create the world. And we each have this process going on inside of us. But every person also has their own place where they usually find themselves, that they have stronger, like, with any personality assessment, you're going to always find that there's certain things that you're more naturally drawn to, right? So Leia, it says, where's the root of Leia's soul? Leia is Hey Gedailah. She is rooted in the world of Bina. Okay? And then Rachel is Hey Ketana, which means that she's rooted in the world of Malchus. Okay, that's the root of their souls. So Leia is Leia is, you can say, if we're going to like really categorize them, Leia is more intellectually minded. She's in the world of machshava, right? In the world of thought, versus Rachel is in the world of dibor, or Malchus, which is speech, right? In the world of sharing. So Leia is automatically much more introverted, because thought is an internal process, right? Versus Rachel is more extroverted. She's more out there, and she's sharing. We see, who does Yaakov meet first? He meets Rachel first, right? She's the one at the well. She's out, and he develops actually a relationship with Rachel first, right? He's drawn to Rachel and to her extroversion, you can say. And then this continues. You even see that as we go on, we see even in their children, this impacts their children. What are Leah's sons? What do? They are shepherds. The whole idea of being a shepherd, and you see in Judaism, all of like the Shvatim were shepherds, Moshe was a shepherd, David was a shepherd. Shepherding is a job. We're not so familiar with that job, I feel like, right? But it's kind of mindless, right? You're just like watching the sheep and herding them. So you're able to then be very much in your own head, right? It's a good introvert's job. You're able to be in your own head and think about things and sort of live a more elevated, quiet existence as a shepherd, right? What is Rachel's son? We don't really get so much into Binyamin because he sort of stays a child through the story. But her other son, Yosef, what's his job? He's the assistant to the king. And throughout the whole story, we see how he uses his charm and his like wit to get himself into the position, to get himself out of a lot of really negative situations. The king, the assistant to the king, and not only that, he comes up with this whole plan, this whole economic plan, right? With storing the wheat and distributing the food. So does he have any time to think for himself? No, that's totally a job of Dibor, of expression, of sharing, right? And when you're constantly in this state of sharing, there's not a lot of space for machshava, right? So we see that they're like two opposite personalities, you can say. Machshava, intellect, versus Dibor, speech. And what happens? They both have to marry, these two sisters, they both end up marrying Yaakov, right? So who is Yaakov drawn to? Rachel, right? That's his first, his appeal is to Rachel, and he's drawn to Rachel. Why is Yaakov drawn to Rachel? Because Yaakov knows that, back to all the stories really that we said until now, that we know that our mission is to change the world. Can you change the world in this if you're constantly in an introverted inside space? Like we said before, you could be in a party of intellectuals, but no change, and they're all talking about how to change the world, but no change is actually happening, right? We need to actually if you're in the world of intellect, nothing's happening outside of that. It's a very insular space, versus the world of Dibor is how we bring things to the entire world. The way you spread things to the entire world is through expression, through sharing, right? And Yaakov knows that his mission is to change the world. So who's he drawn to? He's drawn to Rachel. But who does he have to go through first? Who does he marry first? Is Leah. Because you can't forget that along your process of sharing and changing the world, that you need to have something that's filling up your speech, right? Like, you can be like all empowered to do stuff, but unless you take the time to go first through the internal process of changing yourself, but also developing an idea of what exactly is it that I'm trying to do, right? We can't just jump right into the changing. We first have to go through the internal process of what is it exactly that I'm trying to accomplish. Does this make sense? Right? So the point is that it needs to be substantial change. Where does the substance grow? In the mind, right? The substance develops in the mind. And then, so he really works with both, right? And I guess you can say, like, the message that we draw from here, usually people aren't both of these together. Like, it's hard to really have that perfect picture of someone who has all the ideas and really understands what needs to happen, and then the doers that actually make it happen, right? Often there's like a split between the two, right? And in this case, we see that that's true, right? They're two separate people. The point is that, I guess we can say that, first of all, there's always space within ourselves to develop that other side, of the opposite side of ourselves. That's it, right? So if you're in the world, if you're more of like the introverted world of thought, you can always develop your power of speech and push yourself to go out. And the opposite, if you're constantly out, take the time to go in and develop what you're going to be sharing, right? But on the other hand, I think the interesting thing over here is we have them both marrying one person. I think the idea is also that we have to really work together, find the people that complement our abilities, and work together with other people who have their own strengths to actually create something that's impactful, right? In a business, you'll often have like the different people with their different strengths, and that's what creates a successful business. And so too, if we're trying to talk about like on a more meaningful level in achieving some sort of change of any sort, we have to find those people and work together with the people who have sort of complement our personalities, and sharing with them and uniting with them to accomplish the mission. So that would be Sarah, Rifka, Rachel, and Leia, their personalities, how it manifests within them, and how we can probably, hopefully, learn a lesson from them. And if anyone has any questions, comments, if you still remember them. Okay, so what does